A man returns to Selma to confront the ghosts of his past.
Ghosts in the sense of my experience of utter terror.
Ghosts from when the nation was at war with itself.
All the way from Selma town.
Ghosts of a murder long forgotten. A murder that changed history. A murder still unsolved today.
He was found not guilty. I believe he is guilty.
Also on Impact, the most dangerous plane in the U.S. Air Force.
2% of them a year at the Academy are crashing and killing people. No other airplane in the Air Force has a rate anything like that.
A plane so dangerous, the Air Force grounded it after a series of deadly crashes.
Clearly, the engine was not getting the proper fuel.
So why is a plane so dangerous, used to train the greenest pilots? Air Force Academy cadets. Finally, on Impact. In northern Italy, very young children are creating wonders.
They look to be so rich, but I think that the richness is here.
Teachers are now bringing this richness to America's children.
Can I sketch your ride?
We have to reinvent it. We can't just transplant it.
It's children's education Italian style, coming to a school near you. Impact, CNN and Time on special assignment. With Bernard Shaw in Washington, D.C. and Stephen Frazier in Atlanta. Impact, a collaboration of two of the world's leading news organizations, CNN and Time. From Washington, D.C., here's Bernard Shaw.
Welcome to Impact. Sometimes great change comes about when ordinary people are caught up in extraordinary events. Tonight, we bring you the story of a turning point in U.S. history. It is a story of a long-forgotten murder and of justice denied. For most people, this is a story out of the history books. By chance, it's a personal story for someone here at CNN. Senior correspondent Kathy Slobogan revisits a time in the past that still haunts one family today.
I can't say that I was scared to death by any means.
All the way from Selma town.
I certainly knew that I wasn't going to a picnic.
Clark Olsen and his daughter Marika are on a journey to the past. A past where the country was at war with itself.
Here's the bridge.
Here's the bridge coming up.
The famous bridge.
Yes. Edmund Pettus Bridge.
This bridge into Selma, Alabama is haunted by ghosts. It's a place where two forces collided and changed history. A place where ordinary people making a stand made a difference.
I was part of that. Not out of any great wisdom or courage or anything like that, just sort of happenstance. And I was there.
From Selma town.
In 1965, at the height of American black struggle for civil rights, Reverend Martin Luther King chose Selma to make a stand.
We have the right to walk the highway.
Lord, I didn't get much sleep.
We have the right to walk to Montgomery if our feet can get us there.
Back then, in much of the South, blacks were effectively denied the right to vote. Blacks who tried were forced to pay poll taxes or take complicated tests like reciting the entire Constitution. In Selma, out of 14,000 black citizens, only 250 were registered to vote.
If he was a good black, as they call him, they used a different word than that. They used the N-word. They might let him vote because they felt whoever he worked for could control him. But if he was a professor at one of these black colleges, they wouldn't let him vote. They'd give a test that you couldn't pass. And I imagine it was dehumanizing to the blacks. Took away all their dignity.
Mayor Joe Smitherman was the mayor of Selma in 1965 and is the mayor now. He's come a long way since then. Were you a segregationist back then?
Yes. Well, segregation, so you wouldn't have been in public office. But, you know, I grew up in segregation. I was poor white. And I never really gave it a thought. You just took it for granted.
That's why were moving in a creep.
Martin Luther King made sure it would never be taken for granted again. On Sunday, March 7th, 1965, King's protesters began a march from Selma to Montgomery, the state capital, to dramatize the cause. To leave Selma, the marchers had to cross the Edmund Pettus Bridge.
But I thought of Sheriff Jim.
But on the other side of the bridge, Sheriff Jim Clark and his posse of deputized civilians were waiting for them.
Advance toward the group. See that they disperse.
The confrontation has become the stuff of legend. Armed with tear gas, clubs, and whips, Sheriff Clark's deputies mowed down the marchers. By the time they were through, 17 had been hospitalized, 65 more were injured. Americans were sickened by the images of officers of the law brutalizing non-violent citizens. They called it Bloody Sunday.
Well, I thought it was terrible, but even I was shocked at it.
Selma sprang overnight from an obscure southern town to the front pages of world newspapers.
From this church, Martin Luther King called for ministers from around the country to come to the aid of the Selma marchers. He thought sheriff's deputies would never attack clergymen. 3 Unitarian ministers were among those who answered the call. By chance, they would become participants in history. One of them, James Reeb, would become a martyr of the civil rights movement.
I was with Jim Reeb.
You were?
I was one of them.
Clark Olsen was one of the 3. His daughter, Marika, has waited her entire adult life to make this pilgrimage with him to Selma. Marika, a producer who works for Impact, invited us to come with them.
I was there.
Kidding.
No, I'm not kidding. And I wanted to come here to show my daughter what happened.
I wanted to make a pilgrimage with my father to a place where I thought we needed to confront my father's ghosts, and in fact my ghosts as well.
Ghosts in the sense of my experience of utter terror, and the ghost in the sense of justice not done, and good ghosts in the sense of the progress made.
We've got a rope that's a Berlin Wall.
When Clark Olsen arrived 2 days after Bloody Sunday, Selma was in an ugly mood. Its way of life challenged by outsiders.
In Selma, Alabama.
Well, you hated them. You hated them. You detested them. We were wrong. All Americans should have had the right to vote, but you got caught up in the emotion, the bitterness of these outside people, as we call them.
Clark Olsen arrived at Brown's Chapel, Reverend King's headquarters, in the evening.
I looked around to see who I knew, and I saw Orloff Miller and I saw Jim Reeb, and we then got together and went off to dinner.
The 3 men went to a black restaurant, Walker's Cafe, had dinner, and headed back to the church.
And it's shorter distance
To walk
go
this
this way.
way.
And it's the only reason we turned this way.
Okay.
It was a fateful decision. The shortcut went through a poor white section of town. As they approached the Silver Moon Cafe, known for rowdy white customers, a group of men came at them from behind.
I remember they came across the street from over there, and they shouted, "Hey, you niggers." And one of them carried a club, and he swung this club. I just remember how hard he swung it, and it hit him right over the ear.
After the attack, the Reverend Jim Reeb lay on the ground, his skull fractured. Olsen and Miller, who were not badly injured, picked Reeb up and walked him to a nearby black business for help. Then began a 3-hour journey to the Birmingham hospital. On the road, there was more terror. A flat tire, and then, as they turned off the road, a car of local whites pulled up behind them.
I was very afraid. I frankly thought I might end up in a ditch that night. And of course, compounded with that was the whole business of Jim Reeb, very hurt, perhaps dying right there in our hands.
They managed to call for an ambulance, and the car of local whites left. When they finally reached the hospital in Birmingham, Olsen was interviewed.
Do you think that you'll come back to Selma at all, ever?
Oh, yes, I would like to. I'd like to come back to a Selma in which this couldn't happen.
I can't talk about it without coming to some tears, or at least I haven't been. Maybe now that I've been here and relived it with you, maybe I'll be able to. But that terror is very, very much part of me.
3 Unitarian ministers.
Martin Luther King was informed of the attack on the ministers during a speech.
I understand one was so brutally beaten that he had to be rushed to the hospital in Birmingham with a possible brain concussion.
Within 24 hours, Jim Reeb was dead. He was 38 years old. He left behind a wife and 4 children.
At times, history and fate meet at a single time, in a single place, to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama.
On March 15th, President Johnson asked a joint session of Congress to pass the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Reverend Reeb's death was a trigger.
Many were brutally assaulted. One good man, a man of God, was killed.
I won my freedom in 65.
With protection from the National Guard, Reverend King finally marched to Montgomery. The Voting Rights Act passed, sweeping away barriers for black voters. In 10 years, the number of black elected officials in the southern states affected went from 72 to 2,568.
Segregation bound to fall.
The 3 ministers who came to Selma had their names etched on the pages of history. But 32 years later, their final chapter has yet to be written.
There was a conspiracy of silence at that time, and perhaps even now.
When we come back, the unsolved murder that history forgot.
We continue with our story, A Murder in Selma. The events brought about a monumental change, guaranteeing black citizens of the South the right to vote. We return to Selma, Alabama with someone who took a stand and paid the price. Kathy Slobogan resumes our report.
I suppose everyone grows up with the myth of the boogeyman. And for me, Selma, the town, was my version of a boogeyman. It was a place where good people like my father could get hurt and bad people like the assailants could go free.
The bloody struggle in Selma more than 30 years ago brought about a great national change. James Reeb's death was a spur to that change. But if Reeb's death pushed progress, it also revealed an ugly underside of Southern society, where outside agitators were considered worse than criminals and deserved what they got, and where no one was going to stand up to make sure that somebody went to jail for the death of James Reeb. During his pilgrimage to Selma, Clark Olson told the story of Reeb's death to a group of tourists visiting Brown's Chapel. Martin Luther King's base of operations.
They arrested 3 men. The 3 men who were arrested were acquitted. It was an all-white jury, and so they were found innocent.
Can't believe that.
3 men did in fact stand trial for the attack. Elmer Cook, a town ruffian with numerous assault arrests, and the Hoggle brothers, Stanley and O'Neill, nicknamed Duck. 32 years later, Clark Olsen stood in the same courtroom where he had identified Cook as one of the assailants.
I remember pointing in this direction, not way over there, not way over there. And it was such a... It was a difficult... It was a difficult thing to say. That you did it.
Olsen's testimony was backed up by the other minister, Orloff Miller. But the defense cast doubt on whether Reeb died because of the beating, even suggesting someone in the civil rights movement killed him to create a martyr. An all-white male jury acquitted all 3 men. To this day, no one has been punished for the death of James Reeb.
I hope they found some punishment in their soul, as it were. I hope they found something in their soul that said what they did was wrong, and that they found some way to make some amends for it. That's all I can hope for.
There was a town where there was people who had beat my father and killed his friend. There was a trial, and yet it seemed like this town had conspired to keep the assailants from getting justice done.
In fact, the town closed ranks. CNN has obtained the FBI file on the investigation, a file filled with interviews with local residents who would not talk, who said things like the ministers got what they deserved, or they did not want to see anyone get in trouble. Do you think there's any way a jury from this town would have convicted those men?
Not in those days, no.
The file revealed there were other eyewitnesses who saw Cook and the Hoggle brothers attack the ministers. One witness was judged to be mentally incompetent and barred from testifying. Another, R.B. Kelly, took the Fifth Amendment. He is now dead. There was another eyewitness to the attack, Billy Dowd Edwards. He fled Selma rather than testify. But more than 30 years later, we tracked him down here in the Mississippi Delta. Billy Dowd Edwards comes from a long line of Ku Klux Klansmen, although he's not a member himself. A businessman in Washington County, Mississippi, he would not talk to us on camera. But off camera, he said he would have been a hostile witness at the trial, unwilling to say under oath what he saw that night. What's more, he said the Klan would have killed him if he had gone back to Selma to testify. His final words on the subject? If Elmer Cook and the Hoggles were guilty, they had already paid for it by going through a trial. His views are echoed by others in Selma, people who acknowledge that the defendants might be guilty of the attack, but that they had paid their debt. There is no great cry for justice in this town. Many felt the 3 ministers were interfering where they didn't belong, that the defendants were acting out the frustration of a whole town.
They were typical Southern people that were strong segregationists and let their emotions get the best of them.
You think they were involved in this fight?
Certainly they were involved. They claim they didn't kill him, though.
Well, when you think about it now, even knowing the mood of the time, was justice served?
Well, who's to say was justice served? That's a hard question for me to answer. Some of these people that were involved in that are still living today.
Still living and flourishing. Duck Hoggle, one of the 3 men acquitted at trial, and the only one still alive, is a prosperous businessman with a restaurant and a car dealership. I wondered if I could talk to you about what happened with Jim Reeb back in 1965. Hoggle would not talk to us.
Well, I hope he's somewhat at ease with his soul. I guess that's the best I can say. Or maybe I should say I hope he's at ease with his soul. He was found not guilty. I believe he is guilty.
Clark Olsen is willing to leave it at that. For him, this trip to the past has confirmed the good that came from his ordeal.
But welcome back to Selma.
A black judge now sits in the very courtroom where he testified all those years ago.
The town of Selma now, here with a black judge in this very courtroom, it signifies an enormous change in our society.
But for his daughter Marika, the final outcome of the Selma story was harder to accept.
I'm very angry about it. I'm very angry because I believe that there are assailants out there who are free and justice was never served.
Clark Olsen has put anger behind him. He drove out of Selma satisfied with his small piece of history.
It's had an impact on me on the possibilities of anybody simply taking a stand, saying what's right, doing what's right, and the wonder of what can happen when people do that.
For this town, the waters have closed over the murder from so long ago. History moved on from Selma. When Martin Luther King finally made it to Montgomery, he told his followers it would not be long before they found justice.
How long? Not long. Yes, sir. Because no lie can live forever. Yes, sir. How long? Not long. How long? Because you shall reap what you sow. Yes, sir.
For the three ministers who went to Selma, justice may never come.
Impact will be right back.
Next on Impact, the most dangerous plane in the U.S. Air Force.
2% of them a year at the Academy are crashing and killing people. No other airplane in the Air Force has a rate anything like that.
A plane so dangerous, the Air Force grounded it after a series of deadly crashes.
Clearly, the engine was not getting the proper fuel.
So why is a plane so dangerous, used to train the greenest pilots? Air Force Academy cadets. Impact, CNN and Time on special assignment.
Our weekly program, Impact, continues in a moment. Here's what's coming up.
They traveled to Reggio Emilia, a small city in Italy's prosperous north, to learn how public preschools here manage to produce this. An amusement park for birds with Ferris wheels, fountains, a pond. All designed by very young children, 3, 4, and 5 years old. And these are not standout students, not prodigies, not gifted, no smarter than their counterparts in New York, or Tulsa, or Seattle. But it's easy to see that something is very different here.
Also on Impact.
The T-3 has experienced serious problems with its engine, its brakes, and ultimately, its safety.
This is supposed to be flying with training wheels. You know, these people are not supposed to be crashing and dying. A lot of the parents told me, you know, it wasn't like my kid died bombing Baghdad.
We have a problem with the proper fuel getting to the engine. There are 10 modifications that we're going to do to the engine, and we feel confident that that will result in the proper operation of the engine.
What are they going to fix that they haven't fixed already after the first few deaths?
Impact returns with Stephen Frazier in Atlanta.
For American pilots, the deadliest plane in the Air Force fleet right now isn't the stealth fighter or the B-1 bomber or even the high-tech F-15. It's a single-engine propeller plane, a trainer that has too often been too much to handle when a cadet from the Air Force Academy is at the controls, even with an instructor helping from the co-pilot's seat. Here's Time Magazine executive editor John Stacks with the reason why.
Pace Weber was among the nation's best and brightest, an Air Force Academy cadet.
Ever since he was 2, he really liked airplanes. He really liked rockets. He really liked space things.
The son of an airline pilot and flight attendant, Weber dreamed of flying for the Air Force. He excelled in school and sports, and he became one of the select few chosen to aim high at the Air Force Academy. Last summer, Weber started his first hands-on training in the cockpit of the single-engine T-3 over Colorado Springs. The Air Force began using the T-3 at the Academy in 1995 because it can perform aerobatics. Its predecessor, the plodding T-41, could not. The Air Force Command now believes these loops and rolls are the best way to screen fledgling pilots. But the T-3 has experienced serious problems with its engine, its brakes, and ultimately, its safety. And Pace Weber knew what could happen when something went wrong in the T-3. In February 1995, 20-year-old cadet Mark Dostal and his instructor pilot Dan Fisher died when their T-3 corkscrewed into the ground. The official cause? The instructor failed to pull the plane out of a manageable spin. September 1996, 21-year-old cadet Dennis Rando and instructor pilot Clay Smith died when their T-3 crashed. The Air Force conclusion? Engine failure while practicing a forced landing. Pace Weber told his mother, Terry, about the accidents.
I had faith that they would not do anything unsafe. They wouldn't do anything to hurt my child. I mean, they invest a lot of money and time on these kids.
We in the Air Force, as you well know, and have seen us and heard us talk on many occasions, try to ensure that whatever aircraft we are flying is as safe as we can possibly get it.
But the T-3 was quickly compiling a frightening record at the Academy.
Well, its performance record is terrible. 2% of them a year at the Academy are crashing and killing people. No other airplane in the Air Force has a rate anything like that.
Time Pentagon correspondent Mark Thompson uncovered reports showing 66 cases of engine failure in the T-3, 9 times in midair.
This is supposed to be flying with training wheels. You know, these people are not supposed to be crashing and dying. It's a propeller-driven airplane. It's the first airplane they're flying. And a lot of the parents told me, you know, it wasn't like my kid died bombing Baghdad. He was at college.
After 17 hours in the T-3, Weber, a 20-year-old college senior, remained fearful of the plane. He mentioned those concerns in calls home.
He would call me about once a week, and he was saying that there had been a lot of mechanical problems happening to other planes, some to him, and it was tense. It was tense. It was a lot of work, and it was nerve-wracking for him, I think.
When you read the accident reports and you have these youngsters sitting in front of senior Air Force officers asking questions in a small room about how do you feel about this airplane, they betray an air of, shall I say, not too loaded with confidence. There were some concerns. There was some doubt. There was some nervousness.
On June 23rd, Weber talked to his mother for the last time.
He had said that one of the other cadets had gotten into some sort of situation, a spin, and they almost didn't get out of it, and the kid got on the ground and quit the program right there. He kept at it. He only had 2 more hours to go before he was going to come home.
2 days later, Weber was practicing takeoffs and landings when the plane stalled at low altitude. The Air Force says the instructor should have been able to gain control of the plane, but the crash killed Weber and flight instructor Glenn Comeau. Pace Weber's mother was in bed when the uniformed officers arrived at her door.
And there was a knock on the door, and there they were. mother's worst nightmare. I mean, my heart just sunk.
Pace Weber was the third cadet in 3 years to die in the T-3. In 30 years flying the predecessor T-41 trainer, not one cadet died in a crash. And during the same 3 years, neither the Naval Academy nor West Point lost a cadet in training. Retired General Merrill McPeak, as Air Force Chief of Staff, pushed for a souped-up plane to replace the T-41. That turned out to be the T-3. McPeak told Time magazine, "Our mission is to train warrior pilots, not dentists to fly their families to Acapulco." At the Air Force Education and Training Command in San Antonio, Texas, General Lloyd Newton decided to ground the T-3s after the crash that killed Weber.
We have a problem with the proper fuel getting to the engine. There are 10 modifications that we're going to do to the engine, and we feel confident that that will result in the proper operation of the engine.
Terry Weber is skeptical the Air Force can make the training plane safe to fly.
What are they going to fix that they haven't fixed already after the first few deaths?
And a mother remembers what might have been.
This was a kid that had so much potential. He was really going somewhere with his life. And now it's all gone for, I think, a stupid accident that shouldn't have happened.
Earlier accidents notwithstanding, General Newton of the Air Force's Education and Training Command says the T-3 should be back in service at the Academy this summer. The general says he will take one up himself for tests of its airworthiness before any cadet is permitted to take the controls. Impact is back after this.
For more reporting of this kind on other stories, read Time magazine this week. Coming up on Impact. In northern Italy, very young children are creating wonders.
They look to be so rich, but I think that the richness is here.
Teachers are now bringing this richness to America's children.
Can I sketch your ride?
We have to reinvent it. We can't just transplant it.
It's children's education Italian style, coming to a school near you. Impact, CNN and Time on special assignment.